that picture. Depiction, old picture of the passage that we've just read. I just want you to pay attention to the details in that picture. It's a very dark copy of the picture. It reminds me of a story that my grandmother used to tell about two sailors who went out to sea, one named Bill and the other named Bob. And Bill turned to Bob and said, "Tell me a story." And this is how the story went. It was a dark and stormy night. Two sailors went out to sea, one named Bill and the other named Bob. Bill turned to Bob and said, "Tell me a story." And this is how the story went. I don't know. Sometimes I shouldn't say everything that comes into my mind when I step up here. But this dark picture and depicting this image that we've just read about. Don't you care that we're perishing? What started out as a simple task turned into a nightmare. Judy and I were getting ready to move to the Philippines in 1997 to go and study. And I was racing off to Fee and Steve's house to go and drop off it was actually boxes of nappies, I think, that we needed for Joshua up in the Philippines. Some things, and Steve was going up to the Philippines just a couple of weeks after this incident. And I was going to take these boxes for him so that, like, ready us for when we went up to the Philippines. And as I'm traveling along, going down Nay Road, and I noticed, I'm speeding, I better slow down. But it was too late. Yeah, it's just close to Wentworth Drive. And of course, they pulled me over and said, "You realize that you're going?" I said, "Yeah, I realize. Realized it, and I was slowing down, but so and they punched your number into the rego, and your rego's expired." I'm like, "Yeah, I knew that too," but I read the notice that it got, and it said that I had so much time to pay, a grace period to pay. And I'd self-interpreted the law to say that I could still drive the car in that grace period. And so, the fine just mounted up and mounted up and mounted up. And I wasn't allowed to drive the car away from that spot. So I had to walk all the way up to Fee and Steve's house and then phone Judy and tell her, the precious few dollars that we had saved for this move of our family to the Philippines to go and study there are wasted in a moment of carelessness. All my dreams were shattered in that moment, and I felt like I was drowning. How often do we feel like we're in a situation where we're overwhelmed by the circumstances around us? Maybe it's a health situation where, last year I went to the doctor and next minute I'm in the ER and they got things attached to me and telling me I've had a heart attack. I thought it was just heartburn. And I know many of you are going through health concerns. And sometimes we cry out to Jesus and say, "Don't you care that we're perishing?" Financial struggles seem to impound on us, and cost of living crisis that we're facing at the moment. We've all sat there and kind of got to realize that there's more fortnight at the end of the money than what we have to get through. And relationships, George mentioned relationships in his prayer, and just how sometimes relationships can really make us feel good, right? And they just make us feel so safe and secure, and other times we're just torn apart by something that someone said. And sometimes it's just a throwaway line, but because of who that person is, it just digs deep into us. And we think, Lord, don't you care that I'm dying here? Mental health struggles, when we think that we had things under control, and then bang, all of a sudden just it all seems to come crushing down. Life transitions as we move from one stage of life to the next, and we find our life out of control. All of a sudden our lives are placed in the hands of others. The storms of life that come and surround us, and we feel like we're drowning. Most often they are unexpected. Those disciples, as they headed out on the Sea of Galilee, did not expect that there was going to be a storm. And apparently the Sea of Galilee is notorious for that the winds can come up really, really quickly, and all of a sudden what looked like a bright sunny day turns into a very dangerous situation. In fact, in the 1980s, 1986, I think, they discovered a fishing boat in the sediment in the Sea of Galilee, about the time of Jesus. It's not this boat, but they called it the Jesus boat anyway, archaeologists. And it's about 8 meters by about 2 meters, so that's about from here to there, right? And about as wide as the platform, maybe. So here you've got 12 guys, 13 guys in this boat. Storms, and it's 1 meter deep, the boat. All right? Out on the size of kind of when you stand there at Cleveland Point and you look at the bottom end of Moreton Bay, that's about the size of the Sea of Galilee. Have you been out there when there's been big storms? All of a sudden these guys are in this terrible situation where it's uncontrollable. No rudder. Master's probably broken. Lynn was telling us about a situation where she was out on a friend's boat and sailing along, and the winds had come up and the mast had broken, and he's in there trying to lift it up, and another boat came past, right, Lynn, and they said, "Can we help you?" And he's like, no, we're fine. How often do we struggle through our struggles and our storms like that? No, I'll be right. Really dangerous situation to be faced. And I couldn't help, as I prepared for the service, to think about the funeral that I did early on in this year for Robert Holden, who died in a storm, drowned on Boxing Day, because the storm had come up so quickly that they didn't realize. Boat capsized and 3 men drowned. Don't you care that we're perishing, Lord? We know that God is in control, right? We read that psalm where it says that God stills the waters and God stills the calm. But sometimes he doesn't. And sometimes the boat sinks. Sometimes the anxieties get the better of us. And sometimes relationships remain irreparably damaged. And sometimes the waves crash over us to the point that we think, Lord, don't you care that we're perishing? Used to sing a little kid's song that went with Jesus in the boat. You can smile in the storm, smile in the storm. Well, these guys weren't smiling. Jesus was in the boat, but they're not smiling by no means. I don't know if you can see the detail on there. Perhaps you want to come up close and look at some of the detail. Maybe we'll leave it up afterwards and look at this detail. Jesus in the boat, that's great, but he's fast asleep. And I don't get that. I know he's tired and exhausted, but this boat is flipping backwards and forwards and the waves are crashing over. I'm sure he's sopping wet already. And he's sleeping in the boat. Did you notice the detail? He's not just asleep, but he has a pillow to sleep on. That was the amazing thing reading through this passage again. All of a sudden I'm like, where do you get the pillow from? And they wake him up and they say, Teacher, don't you care that we're perishing? What do you think they wanted him to do? They weren't waking him up to peace be still the storm. What did they expect Jesus to do? Maybe it's like, Jesus, come on, pull your weight, start bailing water as much as you can. Jesus, hold on to this rope here, we're short of hands. They didn't expect what was going to happen next. And I think very often in our storms, in our situations, when we come to Jesus and we say, don't you care that we're dying here, we're drowning in our circumstances? What do we expect Jesus to do? And I think when Jesus says to the disciples, what are you afraid of? He's asking the question in another way, and he asks this in a couple of different places in the Gospels. What do you want? What do you want me to do? Since I've seen that question and confronted it in myself a number of times, it's a difficult question. Sometimes it seems obvious. Blind Bartimaeus, they bring him to Jesus and he's crying out. And Jesus says to him, what do you want? I think it's obvious, Jesus. He wants to see. And yet, Jesus doesn't assume things in our lives. Jesus doesn't assume what you need in those circumstances. He looks at us and says, what are you afraid of? What do you want me to do in this situation? For these guys, Jesus rebuked the waves and he said, peace, be still. I find this fascinating. He rebukes the wind. It's like the wind is misbehaving here. It shouldn't have been a storm, and yet the storm has come up. Some people interpret it as demonic forces that have come against Jesus and trying to drown him before he has the opportunity to fulfill his mission in this world. It's just intriguing that he rebukes the wind and the waves. Notice he doesn't rebuke the disciples. And in this moment, Jesus' identity is revealed. They called him teacher. Teacher, don't you care that we're perishing? For them, this is Jesus, the carpenter, who was their rabbi, their teacher in this situation. They weren't thinking, Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, in my boat so that I can smile in the storm all the day long. They, even at the time that Mark wrote this passage, the church hadn't even formulated any doctrine of Trinity. They hadn't even fully realized the doctrine of Christology, which, those who've been to college have split their heads open trying to recognize the two natures of Christ and reading Bultmann and Barth and all these other people. They hadn't got there yet. It's just Jesus in the boat from up north. And even in the miracle, they don't grasp who this is. And they look at him and say, who is this man? There is an immediate rescue that they receive. But they haven't yet realized the ultimate rescue that Jesus is working towards. When I look at the detail in this picture, and I think about the detail, even down to the pillow that Jesus is resting his head on in the story. Yet there's other detail that I wish Mark had included in the story. How far were they from the sea? What was going through their minds in this moment? How did they get from that point back to shore? All of a sudden they're on shore in the next. So there's a lot missing. So then I start thinking, well, why does Mark include this detail that we have in the story? Even the pillow. I don't have an answer for the pillow, sorry. It's just one of those mysteries that are going to remain with us. But in the detail that we're given, Mark is painting us a picture not just of this immediate rescue and that Jesus can calm the winds and the waves, but that this is part of the story of Jesus traveling towards the cross, where he faces a greater storm that all of us face. and he travels through that storm and crosses to the other side. And in his resurrection brings to us a power that is able to face these circumstances which, even though we are perishing, even though we may perish in this moment, Jesus is asleep in the boat. Can we face our perils with this calm? Not every storm is stilled, and faith doesn't always fix the circumstances. Jesus faced Gethsemane. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced the fiery furnace and said, even if our God is able to save us from the fiery furnace, but even if he does not, they knew that this was a possibility, we will not give in. Sometimes faith gives us the courage to face the circumstances, no matter how desperate they are. And Paul speaks about this from Corinthians that Eileen read to us. That they experienced beatings and imprisonments and riots and sleepless nights and hunger, and all for the sake of bringing the good news about Jesus to the world. In fact, some of those situations that they were facing were inflicted upon them by the very people that they were ministering to. And he says, we were treated as impostors. You are rejoicing, but we are poor. It's as though we're being killed. We're ill repute. And there's a huge struggle between Paul and the Corinthian church that is going on in the background of that. A turmoil, a storm that is pushing in. And the peace that Paul speaks into that storm is his approach to ministry. Purity and knowledge and patience and kindness and holiness of spirit and genuine love. Genuine love that looks into the circumstances, and even though the people that we are ministering to seem to be against us, it faces that storm and says, I care that you are perishing, and I will keep walking with you through this journey. When Jesus looks at the disciples and said, why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? I kind of wonder what the tone of his voice is there. Is this a rebuke at the disciples? Do you still not have faith? Are you stupid? Sorry, I shouldn't say that. You know, that's the strongest swear word in Japanese, is to tell somebody that they're stupid. They don't have anything stronger. Is it a rebuke? Or is it an invitation in this moment to these men to have faith? To come into this relationship with Jesus as they begin to realize. This is the beginning of Mark. They're still learning who Jesus is. They've probably only been traveling with him for a few months, maybe only a few weeks. There's no indication in this passage that Jesus is angry or disappointed with them. And yet, as we travel with Jesus, I wonder how we sometimes hide our fear because we think Jesus might be angry with us in this moment. I shouldn't be feeling like this. I'm a Christian. I follow Jesus. I have my doubts in this moment, but I can't share that with anyone because what are they going to think about me? And this, as I reflected on this passage, I thought, I have my doubts about what's happening here. Not that Jesus can't still the wind and the waves. I'm just fascinated by this. There's actually 3 megas in the Greek language. The word mega is great, big, and there's 3 megas in here. The mega storm that is happening, the mega calm that comes afterwards, and the mega terror that the disciples face after the peace comes. And they look at this person and they say, who is this who has the power to still the storms? And as I looked at that, I'm like, Jesus is gentle, Jesus, meek and mild. And I take this passage in my stride. Yes, he can calm the waters. But these guys, they were confronted with something that they didn't know what was going on. And I think sometimes we've domesticated Jesus. And we need to get a bit of mega awe into our recognizing who Jesus is. And when he says to us, why are you afraid? To explore that area. Where are those areas in our lives that cause us fear, that bring doubt in our lives? Our fears can actually lead us to a place of faith when we face them with Jesus. Can we even know our deepest fears? Are we willing to name that deep fear that we have? We all have it. We all carry those areas of doubt with us. And when I do, then my faith begins. Or else we end up putting a panda mask on our head and pretending that we're something that we're not. Let us be vulnerable with Jesus. Go to him and say, don't you care? I'm drowning here. Help me, Lord. Hear Jesus' invitation to confront the fear and find his peace despite the circumstances that are raging around us. Jesus is asleep on his pillow, and he invites us to join him, to have peace in that storm, to lay our troubled head and find rest in him. Take a moment to look at this picture. Look at the detail. What do you see? How does it speak to you this morning? Let's pray. Feel free to keep your eyes open as we pray and look at this picture. Father, as we look at the storm, we look at this boat that's being tossed to and fro, some of us see our past, some of us see our present. None of us want to see this as our future. As we see Jesus in the boat asleep, Lord, my heart longs to be able to fall asleep in the midst of the storm. And yet too often I come calling to you and saying, don't you care? Thank you that you are gentle with me in those moments, that you rebuke the storm outside and invite me into a closer relationship with you, to get a greater understanding of who you are. And Lord, as I do, I am amazed that you do care for each one of us. And so, Lord, whether the storm rages or whether there is peace around, we put our trust in you. Not just for our sake, Lord, but help us to extend this peace that we feel to those around us, to offer a pillow as a place of rest in the midst of the storm, because we know Jesus is with us. And it's in his name and his power